Are we ready? Okay, our work session is in order, and I would like to thank everyone for being here today in person or online. We're glad to have you. And our work session today, Chris is going to provide us with some discussion on level funding, our budget, and our staff has spent a tremendous amount of time doing a budget, and now they're spending a lot of time reworking this budget. And this what we're working on contains a lot of unknowns that staff is trying to work through. So we just want to thank staff for their time and for the work that they've done on a budget presentation. And so I'll ask County Administrator Chris if he would proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good to see you today. Mr. Thompson, good to see you. Good to be seen with us today. Of course, we met a couple of weeks ago and at our April meeting, and I gave an overview of a modified budget for FY 2021. And so today I'm just going to review some of that I reviewed with you a couple of weeks ago, and then what we're going to do after that is our finance staff are going to hand to you the modified budget, including line items and everything. That way you'll have that opportunity to have that in front of you. We'll also be posting that online for citizens to take a look at. If there are any questions and so forth, as we go through this, by all means, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, please let me know. So, that being the case, let's just jump right in. Is it working?
Yeah.
There's a clicker. All right, okay. All right, thank you. All right. I started this a couple of weeks ago in times, first really looking at the current fiscal year and where we are with our revenues. As we finish out the FY 19-20 year, we think we're going to be in good shape. Thanks a lot to our property taxes that were collected back in the fall. Our real estate collections are about 99.3%. That was a couple of weeks ago of collections. Personal property, very healthy, as you all know. We've seen a lot of growth in that, of about 1.3 million year over year from the previous year. And so any losses that we may be experiencing this last quarter, the last couple of quarters of the fiscal year, should be offset for FY 19-20. Our other taxes are sales, meals, transient, occupancy. We are starting to see some early data that Finance Director Brian Carter, who's with us, shared with everyone on Friday, and a communication to the board. The sales tax always lags 2 months behind. And so specifically for February, the taxes collected in April really were for February. However, the state, of course, has delayed sales tax collections and deferred that. So even with that, there was a 2% decline in sales revenue in February, and that may be because of that deferral that the state gave an extra month or two in terms of collections. And so we're really not sure yet on how sales really is going to end up, but we're going to know more in the next couple of months. Meals tax revenue. For the month of March, we saw a decline of 21.9%. That's about $19,000. Not a big number for the county in terms of the scheme of things for our budget, but the percentage decline nonetheless is an indicator of the economic disruption with COVID. Same thing for transient occupancy taxes. The March decline was 30%. Again, we have received those revenues for the month of March. We will not receive the revenues for the month of April until the end of May. So the true impact on meals and transient occupancy, we will not know till the end of May. The true impact on sales tax during this disruption, likely not known until June or July. So please keep that in mind as we move forward. Of course, expenditures, we have curtailed all non-essential spending in the county for the remainder of the fiscal year, and we are continually monitoring that with our departments. So, and again, reviewing as we look to next fiscal year, now projecting what next year is going to look like. And when I was before the board presenting the county budget as originally presented in March 17th, we were looking at an increase of $3.1 million, or about 4.43%. Modest growth Not tremendous growth, but modest growth at best. We were seeing that from an estimated 5% growth in our reassessment. Limited growth, of course, in real estate. That's been limited for many years now, about 0.5%. The modest growth in personal property, we were seeing about 3 to 4%. The softening sales tax revenue that we projected, we had an initial 20% increase in FY19 over FY18, but we were really expecting another 5% growth in sales tax prior to COVID. Of course, now that's changed. Flattening interest income, the interest income was anticipated to drop significantly, and of course that has now occurred as the feds have dropped the rates. So all of that was early on in March. And
Chris,
then, yes,
that
sir.
up there, that 0.050 annual growth in reconstruction. Reconstruction is still doing really well then.
It is, but in that 0.50 or 0.5%,
That's not very much compared over.
that's correct. But construction is still strong at this point.
What is, I'm glad you asked about that, Ryan. That seems awfully low for the amount that I'm witnessing around the county right now.
That's based on the average assessment of new value, Mr. Mitchell. While there may be growth, I guess, in new building permits and new construction, that's the overall percentage increase countywide over real estate assessments. About 0.5% a year. It's averaged between 0.5%, 1.5% now, really since prior to the Great Recession. During the early 2000s, we were seeing 6-7% assessment growth. Of course, that's changed, and so average it's only been about 1, maybe 1.5%. But all of this was prior to COVID. So when we were projecting the new budget, this was all prior to COVID, and we shared all this with you all in March. Now, during COVID, how do we project next year's revenues? Very difficult. We are anticipating a lot of declines in several areas. Specifically, real estate collection ratio decline of 97%. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, we thought it could drop as low as 95%. I asked Mr. Carter to go back, and we went back as finance staff, and we looked all the way back probably 12, 14 years, and the lowest it had ever dropped, even during the height of the recession on real estate, was around 96.5%, give or take. So we felt we could up that just a little bit. We thought 95% may have been a little strong a couple of weeks ago, so that number can fluctuate in terms of collections. Personal property reduction. At one point, we were anticipating continued healthy increase in personal property taxes. In other words, more personal property and so forth. For the purposes of next year's budget, this modified budget, we're anticipating essentially flat. Not really any growth there. Sales tax revenue. We're anticipating a reduction of 15%. You'll see a 10% reduction from FY21 to the current year. It's actually 15% in terms of what we originally presented in March, because we were expecting a 5% increase. Now we're looking really essentially equating to a 15% decrease in sales. Again, that's an early estimate that can change. And we will not know better data on the state sales tax until June, really July or August. And so that's one that we're really going to have to monitor and revisit.
Where did those numbers come from?
These projections, they're projections.
That's all they are.
They're projections.
They're just projected.
Yes, sir. They're just projections. Yep, they're just projections. Yep.
And I made a comment, thank you, Ronnie. With everybody at home, people are still doing a lot. There's still people spending a lot of money. I'll use Lowe's for example. If you've never seen that parking lot full, just go by there on a Saturday right now. I think there's going to be sales tax, more sales tax generated from that industry than others, and people are still eating out. So I made this comment before, so I know it's just a projection, but I wanted to stay optimistic.
I have heard the comment, and I've heard the windshield surveys of the Lowe's parking lot. A lot of home improvement activities going on right now as people are at home. I have heard that. Yes, sir. Again, these are projection. Meals tax reduction of 25%, lodging tax reduction of 50%. You saw the March numbers. We'll need to watch that and as the April numbers and May numbers come in. Interest income, again, 10% reduction. That's really based on the fact that interest rates have really flattened out to almost 0%. So when you add all of that together, that's a potential total loss of the once projected revenue of about $2.7 million. Again, we were projecting $3.1 million in new discretionary revenue. This eats into that, obviously, with a reduction of about $2.7 million. And again, these are early projections. They can change. They can go up. They can go down. And we're going to have to continually watch them. But we've got to plan for it. Any of that new revenue that we once were projecting, that's going to be absorbed in revenue losses. And so we have a modified projection revenue of about $458,000. That's about 0.65% year over year, essentially a flat level budget. And I'll get into how that looks. Talking some about the state revenues, and that's the big unknown. Over 50% of the county's budget is funded by the state and federal funds. Virginia Secretary of Finance is projecting a $1 billion loss in revenue statewide. The state funding reductions are likely coming, as they did with the prior recession. We just don't know how and what form yet. When I spoke to you 2 weeks ago, the General Assembly was reconvening. I spoke to you on the Tuesday. They were reconvening on the Wednesday. The General Assembly took no action, and the governor took no action on revising the state budget. They punted and said they didn't know where all the revenues were going to go. And so the wisdom of the governor and the Assembly at the time was we'll likely need to reconvene a session in July when the state revenue picture's better known, or more clarity is known at that time. Again, didn't necessarily help us in revising this budget per se, but also knowing that more revisions are likely coming this summer. We just don't know how and to what extent yet. Looking at GDP, again, we know the gross domestic product in the country is certainly declined in the second and likely third quarters, and that's not expected to return until the fourth quarter and maybe the first quarter of 2021. The proposed budget presented on March 17th is now in strategic pause. I shared that with you a couple of weeks ago until our local and state revenue picture becomes more clear. And so we have a modified FY21 budget, and that's our course. And I'm going to get into that a little bit and hit some highlights. Almost all new spending has now been subtracted from the fiscal year 2021 budget that we presented on March the 17th. There has been a hiring freeze implemented, and of course all non-essential spending has been eliminated effective March the 19th. The proposed discretionary revenue has dropped from, as I said earlier, from $3.1 billion to $458,000. And then we subtracted several items to make up for that loss. The 3% cost of living adjustment for employees is now subtracted, as is new spending for schools and new positions. And additional reductions to our operating budgets, we have went through those diligently. We've asked county departments to assist us in this. It wasn't just a couple of folks going through to say, oh, this one or that one. We made sure that the departments, they went through an exercise of 2.5%, 5%, 7.5% reductions. We went back to those departments, looked at their line items. I will tell you, in many of the departments, our core services were specifically looked at, law enforcement, fire, EMS. They have primarily been held harmless in many of these reductions at this point. There are adjustments in all of the line items, public safety and law enforcement. But relatively speaking, at this point, we've tried to hold public safety as a core government service. And you'll see that when we pass out the amended budget. The school budget. There are still state revenue increases in the school budget at this point, because that's what the state budget that was approved. However, as the governor, as the General Assembly has said, they will revise their projections, but that's going to be determined later this summer. We will not know this until July. So the state funding increase initially for the schools is about $1.8 million. The state sales tax increase of $241,000. Obviously, there's likely adjustments coming there. We just do not know. I had a chance to speak with Dr. Church And we just confirmed that. They do not know, as does any school system in Virginia at this point, do not know the revised projections. They are expecting a continued drop in the school population. They were projecting a loss of 175 students. And so, as I said, modification to the school budget, that's to be determined, the summer session of the General Assembly. That being said, in terms of what our modified recommendation to the school funding, what does that look like? Well, we're looking level funding the school budget from the current fiscal year 1920 to the next fiscal year 2021 at this point. Again, this is at this point in time. That's level capital funding. If you all recall, we had recommended increases of $200,000 in capital. Now that's subtracted. We had recommended additional $900,000 in operations. That's now subtracted. Essentially, it's a level funded budget. In addition, special education CSA private day cost of $428,000. If you all recall, we started last year with $190,000 in a reserve to start the share of private education special day placement funding for the schools as a school responsibility, and started shifting some of those costs to the school system because it is special education, it is teaching, it is going towards those funds. We're recommending to continue that this year for a total of $428,000. Essentially, the school system will receive an invoice each month for the private day placements. Again, bringing accountability to the school system for private day placements. In terms of the modified budget, again, it's a strategic pause. There are no new tax rate adjustments recommended. We're recommending that any revenue losses are absorbed by revenues. Almost all new spending's been subtracted from the next year's budget that was originally proposed. The modified budget is $146.9 million. That's an increase of 2.19%. And many may say, well, why is there an increase? Well, that's based on that additional school revenue money that we're not sure of yet. Almost entirely that solely goes to schools, CSA, and social services. That's not local dollars. So, next steps. We're obviously going to share with you, and we'll share the line items here shortly and pass these out to you. Today's a budget work session. I'd like to talk to you all if you have questions regarding what we're recommending. We will need to schedule a budget and tax rates possibly for May the 19th. That's your May the 19th meeting, if you're comfortable at this point to do so. And let me just say there, after the public hearing is held for tax rates and the budget, the board can always hold additional work sessions. You can get feedback from the public. You can take a time out. You can always decrease the tax rate. You cannot increase it once it's been advertised, specific tax rates, but you can look at doing multiple different things. Hear from the public, hold additional work sessions, hopefully maybe more information from the state. So all that being said, we would look and need to adopt a school budget sometime during the month of May. Typically, May 15th is the target. However, in speaking with Dr. Church and looking at the revised state numbers that really the state's not even aware of yet, teacher contracts and new contracts for employees likely will not go out until the end of May, the 1st of June. So when we talk about a level funded school budget, again, that's exactly what it is, essentially the county. Additional budget work sessions can be held as needed, and then of course budget adoption, that's required by June 30th. And then this is going to take summer and quarterly reviews. We're not done once we get a budget adopted at this point. I don't think we will be this year. I would like to highlight a few things, and I'll ask finance staff maybe if they can go ahead and pass out what we call the modified budget. We've put them in booklets for you all. At this point, what you can do, if you have your budget books, you can always take these out and put them in your ring binders. But these are modified again. Nothing like what we passed out on March the 17th. But I will say there are some things in the budget that I'd like to point out. I know there was a lot of discussion about fire, EMS, and public safety. And specifically, this board modified our EMS insurance billing rates back in February, if you all recall. And with that modification, the idea of that and raising those rates was to raise adequate or sufficient revenue to fund essentially 3 new paramedic firefighter positions to make sure we have some coverage, specifically in some of our central station areas. That being the case, those dollars are there, those positions are still there technically in the budget. However, we do think with the reduction in call volume that it would be prudent to wait a quarter, 2 or 3 months, to make sure those revenues are there before we bring on those 3 positions. But those 3 positions are budgeted, they are there in the budget.
Has Billy already had the Director Ferguson already hired those 3 positions?
He has not, he has not.
This budget is based on before the reassessment, after the reassessment.
This is based on after the
Like I said,
reassessment.
we got 4.5%, maybe increases. So this based on that increase, or is this based on the prior?
For the billing, the overall budget.
I'm not talking about the overall budget.
Overall budget. The overall budget is based on new reassessment figures.
Okay, that's 4.5%.
Approximately
Right,
5%.
right.
Approximately 5%.
That's probably, I want to
Yes,
go
sir.
straight on how this
Yes.
coming around, whether this is
Yeah.
used on the old schedule or the new budget.
It's based
Something
on,
like that.
it's based on 61 cents real
Okay.
estate
Okay.
and reassessment
Okay.
growth of 5%. I will tell you, and it also is based on the losses from the other, transient meals, interest, and all the others. I will tell you in terms of public safety, in addition to those 3 positions that will be paid for entirely from EMS billing revenue. And again, it's a matter of using some fiscal precaution. Let's look at 2 or 3 months and make sure those revenues are there before we bring those folks on. But it is budgeted. In addition, we have set aside, initially, I think we set aside around $50,000 to look at our volunteer fire EMS recruitment program, whether that be a years of service retirement program or a personal property program. We have been able to manage to carve out $35,000, I believe, what we finally were able to carve out $35,000. So we were glad we were able to do that. That's there. The program hadn't been baked yet, but we got it into the budget, at least thus far.
And that's for recruitment and the personal property relief?
Either or, ever how we come up with whatever's finally decided on. It's just a placeholder there.
Chris, can I make a
Yes.
quick comment? I hope I don't offend you when I say this. The 3 positions for technically meddling to hold off for 2 or 3 months doesn't really solve the problem that Rocky Mount, which is our central location, still doesn't have adequate coverage. And the reason I know is because I listen to it every day, all day.
Sure.
The agencies, it's not only hurting Rocky Mountain, but it hurts Boone's Mill, Ferrum, Fort Mountain, because those trucks are coming to Rocky Mount every day still. I know the call volume's down. People are scared to go to the hospital, so they're not going unless they have a true emergency.
Right.
I think the call volume will, as things are starting to ease, I think we'll see that call volume start going up. But I know it's up to us, but I'd like to see us go ahead and let Director Ferguson get those 3 positions to, would you call it $150,000, $160,000 for those 3 positions?
It's more than that. It's about 200 and I think it's 187,000 is with benefits.
About 207.
207.
So did you ask Director Ferguson with the decrease in call volume?
I have asked that to him. We've had the discussion about, are we seeing a decrease in call volume? He has not given me specific numbers.
But the answer is yes.
But yeah.
Because didn't he project the extra revenue from the change billing rate closer to 200,000?
He was projecting that, yes, from the change in the billing rate, Mr. Mitchell. What he was not projecting at the time was a decrease in volume of the calls.
Right.
And so that would be the only reason to, rather than start July 1st, to start, September or August, October 1st. It's not that we can't, it's just a matter of where, will those dollars be there? Also, they've had a significant overage the last 3-4 years in overtime and part-time to backfill people for vacation and sick.
Right.
And so the more stations that you bring on full-time, it actually creates more of an overtime, part-time problem because you got more people taking vacation and sick. And so we're watching that too, and that EMS billing money also goes back to fund the part-time and the overtime too.
And didn't he have from the EMS billing, the EMS billing brought in more money last year than he anticipated as well, right? Is that enough to make up the difference in what we're expecting?
We were projecting, I think, 187,000 additional revenue, I believe. That number sticks in my head, but I can get back to you.
Yeah, I think you're close. So there's extra funds from that,
Right.
and we're still going to get additional funds. I mean,
I
Yeah,
understand what Mr. Mitchell's saying, but I have to agree with what Chris has proposed for the mere reason, we would hate to bring them on board now, and for whatever reason, the revenue's not come in as we need, and we get into a situation where we have to furlough or lay someone off. We don't want to do that. So I think if, instead of kicking it in July 1, if we wait until 1st of September, before we start, because it's going to take him a while my brother can't find people to fill jobs in Henry County, so it's going to take him a while to get candidates that he can hire. So I agree with Chris on that.
I do too, but I'm just saying, if a good candidate does come along,
Sure.
we're gonna miss that candidate too. So,
Good discussion. I think what we can do is get some data from Mr. Ferguson in terms of the last couple of months in terms of the billing, just really to see how much call volume has gone down. And maybe it has on fire side, maybe it hasn't on EMS side. I don't know, in terms of the numbers, but we can get that.
I know in Roanoke it hasn't gone down any.
Yeah.
But Chris, as your billing, as your calls go down, your billing money is gonna go down too, isn't it?
Yes, sir. And therein is why we said, well, we may want to hold up a couple months just to see how the billing monies are, but we can get that data.
As one goes down, the other will go down also.
That's right.
And so we may not have the projected money that we think is gonna be there.
I would say they bill based on advanced life support, and they invoice based on basic life support.
That's right.
I would say the ALS, the only calls that I think they're running are true ALS calls, which bring in more money than a BLS call. It's several $100 difference, right? So if the ALS calls have
And that's
ticked up or stayed the
And that's a
same.
good point. That is true. The ALS does provide more billing.
And that's completely all that's unknown, because we don't know how
Right.
things going to go.
I don't think it's gonna hurt for us to wait 3 months to see what's going on, just to err on the side of caution, because we got to come up with $207,000 where it's gonna come from. And we can't speculate on that money once it goes in and we've got to spend it. And it's just like, I would like to bring out that we've done this in the past, as a board in the past. He's cut out the cost of living raise and everything. Well, as it goes along towards, say, Christmas or towards next spring, and we've got some money, there's no reason that we can't get like a bonus at that time. What we're trying to do is be cautious now, because there's unknowns. We don't have a clue what's going on. I mean, right now, we're sitting here, and all I've heard is projected, because it's early in the game. That's not to say that this board doesn't have the authority 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year from now to change all of this depending upon the reality of these projections. I talked to the sheriff a couple weeks ago. He's talking about some potential new problems there with overtime and thing working security places. We could have some areas where there are potential increases. We got areas where there's potential decreases, but the key word is potential. We don't know. And we're just sitting here guessing and all this, and there's nothing wrong now with erring on caution.
Right.
And doing that, because bottom line, if you hire those 3 right now, $207,000, Where's it gonna come from? You can't guess. It says it's gonna come from here or come from there. Where's it gonna come from? Because at that point, it's gotta be a balanced budget. You gotta know where it's coming from. There's where we're at.
Yeah, the money left over from billing last year and still what we're gonna increase. And is the call volume down? Yes. But listening to my pager, I know for a fact there's been days where we have no trucks to run calls because we're still that busy on certain days. The fire calls are almost not existent right now, other than true structure fires. People just aren't. But yeah, I mean, there's days that I hear that there's no trucks available and they're scrambling trying to get Crillian to cover calls. So I'd be interested. I really like to get some good solid data from Director Ferguson.
And that's the good thing about each week we know more. We're going to know more data on sales and meals and lodging, but we're also going to know more data on EMS billing, so we can provide the board with that.
And we will probably have work sessions 2 months from now to see where we are. And we'll have a better picture of it. Is there any way we could use a first responder to cover here to Rocky now?
Yes, we can, Mr. Mitchell.
And it's working, as far as I'm hearing from Snow Creek, first responders do well. And would that person be in line to be hired when we hire the crew?
And Director Ferguson has a full-time employee that teaches EMS class to high school students. I'm pretty sure that's not happening right now. That certain individual can be riding an ambulance right now.
There's some great feedback. I will get back, if I may, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, with Mr. Ferguson and bring back some more data and then possibilities and options. That's an excellent point.
What Chairman Mitchell is suggesting is a great idea because he can work the night shift on Medlin to, instead of being at the office all day, which I don't know what he's got. He might have him doing something, I don't know, but he could hop on a response field like you're talking about, like they did in Snow Creek, and he could answer calls for the night shift some nights to provide it. He's a paramedic, I'm pretty sure.
And that will eliminate some calls, because if he gets to a house and it's not an emergency,
Yes, sir.
he can get a refusal like anybody in recovery.
Yes, sir. That could buy some time until we reevaluate the 3 months. Use all the employees we got right now.
And it could buy some time for runs, because if they determine that it's not an emergency, that saves a call.
And the captain at Squad 2 building said that we can start using that building, so it'd be one person there at night. So, and if they can provide one volunteer at night, they can mark a truck up. Because he's a paramedic. And the way it works is to bring on a full-time employee that's not a EMT basic or an EMT paramedic, from what I understand, if it's a part-time employee, they don't have to have either qualification, but they can have EVOC and just drive. They can drive that paramedic to the hospital and to the calls. So, first response, that's a great idea, Chairman.
Just some other highlights. We did have to, of course, cut out the $200,000 of additional new dollars in the capital budget. We wanted to start both on the school side and the county side. Of course, we've eliminated that now. It's not to say we've eliminated capital. It's a level funded capital. What we did try to do is hold, again, law enforcement and public safety harmless in those two categories. We felt very strongly that safety is a key component of the capital budgets for public safety and law enforcement. And so you will note that in your capital improvement plan. And that, of course, is on what was recommended on March the 17th. It's not to say on what's been requested. I mean, every department, as you all know, have requested far and above what we were even going to be able to fund in the initial budget, March 17th. But in this modified budget, I just want to drive that point, to the board. We did find $200,000 here and there within the capital budget, trimming around as best we could. So this is not an elaborate budget by no means. Again, it is a strategic cause modified budget. Full well knowing we do not know the entire impact from the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're not going to know that until July. As I've said before, budgets are fluid. They can be reassessed. In the improving revenue picture, as already mentioned, we can start adding back things. However, A declining revenue picture is going to be the exact opposite, and that's going to require some further budget reductions. And we've already put our department directors through those exercises. And then in addition, any significant revenue picture, that's where this board will need to have a strategic discussion in terms of our core services and operations, in terms of our service delivery. We're not there yet. We're not at that point yet. As a county, I don't necessarily think other local governments are at this point because it's the unknown. But what this budget does do, it gets a budget balanced. It's a level funded budget, both for the school side, essentially the county side, and it keeps an eye, a big eye, on what may happen in July and August.
Chris, can I go back to public safety for just a moment?
Okay.
Airbags for snow creek, do we have any?
That's currently budgeted in the current budget, yes, sir. In the current capital budget, there are funds included for air packs for Snow Creek. And I think they just finished a grant application from USDA to help offset some of those costs, but that is in the current budget.
They're running out this year and have to be replaced.
It is part of the FY 21 budget. It's still there.
Okay, thank you.
Has Chief Law asked you about the tanker truck still being in the budget too? Has he called you about that?
I've talked to him about it, but my understanding of Chris is we're not in a good place to obligate. You know, Snow Creek, I'm presuming, will be first on the list when we do have funds to get.
Yeah, as originally proposed on March the 17th, there was not adequate capital dollars to fund an additional fire apparatus. And that's not just going to be an issue with COVID, that's an issue without COVID.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to, as a board, it's to the point we've taken on a lot of the apparatus and funding so much per year. We're to the point now, again, that's why the thought was by adding a couple of $100,000 where we could each year to the capital budget, both on the county side and the school side. If we ever got to that point, we thought we were in February and March, and we were starting to build towards that, and now this. So, but that is something that as a board, we're going to have a strategic discussion on in future budget years.
If I may.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, is it possible that that you could prepare a list by department area of the things that have been removed from the budget and by how much?
Yes.
And then a recommendation as we move through the year as to a prioritization
Sure.
of what we should bring back in under staff's guidance and recommendation.
Sure.
And the other thing, are we building in any type of contingency, revenue contingency? When we come to, for instance, when we come to tax time in December, we're not going to be far removed from where we are, probably. And so I'm wondering, is there a percentage of contingency that we're looking at within a revenue category that's going to keep us in a relatively good place without having to cut core services? Because I anticipate that there are going to be a lot of folks, hopefully they'll be back to work, but there's a good chance some of them may not be. And some of their businesses may totally fail. And I'm already worried about our citizens come tax time. So therein, would represent declining revenues for the county. And, what we can do to help mitigate, what's going on with our citizens as well. So I know that's a very broad question, but I was just interested in any comment you may have.
Good question, Ms. Smith. I think in terms of, I'll speak to revenues in a second, in terms of contingencies, in terms of existing fund balances, as the board knows, our fund balance is very healthy, well above the GFOA recommended 20%. In fact, approximately $2 million above and beyond. Again, those are one-time dollars for rainy days, if you will. In terms of ongoing revenues, in terms of building things into the budget, there is approximately $100,000 in the Board of Supervisors contingency, It is for things like that. That's built into this modified budget that we've set aside. We went back and set that aside. We can build upon that as we need to, and especially this summer, as we know more from the state revenue picture, and also just the economic health of the county and businesses and so forth. But your point's well made in terms of that set aside. And as I said, we can add to that revenue contingency, or right now it's in the Board of Supervisors expenditure line item of $100,000. But again, that's for contingencies.
Well, and
Multiple dollars.
I really would discourage our board if it came to the point of using one-time monies for operating. I would very much discourage against us getting into that environment at all.
Right.
You know, we don't need to be set up for any further budgetary challenges as we move into next year.
Sure. And I think our financial advisors would agree.
Yeah.
If I may, while we still kind of have public safety in mind, we've discussed the decline of some of the EMS calls. Before we leave today, I'd like to hear from the sheriff to see how their call volume has been affected. I know the severity of some of their calls has been kind of high. You know, they had an armed standoff last week that got pretty intense. But before we leave, I want to make sure, I'd like to hear from the sheriff to see kind of where they've been and how what they're seeing too. Because, you know, since it's here, I'd like to see what their numbers have been looking like. Because a lot of times that gets overlooked. So before we leave, I'd like for the sheriff to just have a minute or two, just bring us up to speed as to what they're seeing on his side.
But referring back to Ms. Smith's question, that 97% collection this fall is going to tell us a lot
Yes.
of what's going to happen. And if it drops back to 95 or 94,
Yes.
we're going to see a lot more pulling at our finances.
That's right. Yeah, we reduced it from 97 to 95.7. That's the lowest. You know, it's well below the 96.5 or so that was before, but something we have to monitor. We've got to keep an eye on that.
Well, and you know, as we evaluate our budgets, and this board is no stranger to doing this, with all of the cuts that we're having to make and potentially, you know, continue to make, there are going to be consequences to those cuts. And the consequences are going to be real. And so when I ask for that prioritized list, really, Chris, it's with that in mind about what is consequential to what we're having to do without, and how long can we do without? Because we're talking about some things that are fairly significant in terms of need and service levels. And I just think that we can't be vigilant enough to evaluate this as we move through the next 6 to 8 months.
Chris, if I could,
Yes, sir.
I think one thing we need to all remember, that reserve, the fund balance, that belongs to the citizens of Franklin County. That's taxpayer money. We had a huge increase on the personal property a few years ago, 2.46 per $100. I'm not opposed to us examining reducing that and using some of this fund balance money to offset what we take out of that personal property tax. If we lower that, that would help citizens and that would help businesses.
I agree with Mr. Carter 100% on that.
I think the rainy day is here, and it's tough decision time, and I'm all for keeping the fund balance up to par for the creditors, but I'm also up to helping the citizens and the small businesses in this county, and they're going to need it moving forward.
We've already had some businesses shut down. They went out of business.
I'd like to reiterate one thing. I was talking about the Rocky Mountain provides, you know, public safety provides service for Rocky Mountain. I think two key things, and Tim hit on one of them. We need to have the sheriff talk about what he needs. We also need Billy Ferguson sit here to talk about what he needs. Because we can sit here and speculate all we want to what we gotta have. But until you go to the person that does, we need to listen to them. That's the reason I think Mr. Ferguson needs to be here to cover the problems Rocky Mountain, and so the sheriff can cover the problem looking after the county. I think that's two people we need to take pretty serious, and I think they need to be here to counsel us what we can actually do. And like I said, I see the people in Rocky Mount taking care of it, no doubt about it, they pay county taxes too. But like I said, we need to have Billy's input on that also, what we can do.
Mr. Chairman, and, as I said, today's budget work session really just to, again, give you the overview of what we shared a couple of weeks ago with a little more data, give you the line items, let you know what we've done the last couple of weeks, what's in and what's out. Again, the big unknowns, the school system, we're not going to know that until July. That being said, if it's the board's pleasure, if the board feels like certainly, another work session, if a work session is needed before a public hearing or after, that's certainly the pleasure of the board. But what I'll tell you is, after the board receives input from the public on this modified budget, level budget, there's time for further budget work sessions to discuss some of your concerns. I think you've all been in whether you would like to have more information from staff during one of those work sessions for a specific department, if you'd like discussion again on taxes and other things, that can actually be had following the public hearing. So don't feel pressure that that as a body we have to have another work session before the public hearing. Certainly we can, but after the public hearing, there's also time to hold more work sessions before budget adoption, which is required by June 3rd. So we just wanted to give you the overview today, hand out the modified budget and the line items. Again, all subject to change. No locality in Virginia or the United States has been down this road before. And so we know we're going to be continually. Budget used to be, I guess, prior to the recession, it was, maybe 5 months out of the year. Then the recession hit, and it seems like it's at least 10 months out of the year. What I'll tell you now is it's likely a monthly discussion for localities for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think we owe our citizens to do it every month too.
I'll ask you, when you feel like you have enough information, we'll call another work session, and then we can get together and look at the information.
Sure.
And I think that would be somewhat of your call when you think your department is ready to bring something fresh.
Well, depending on what information the board wants us to bring back, Mr. Chairman, at this point, we brought you the information today. If you feel comfortable with holding the public hearing on a modified budget on May the 19th, it would be advertising for tax rates and advertising for the budget. Not necessarily that the board will adopt a budget after the public hearing on May 19th. You'll have time up until June 30th to do so, to hold more work sessions to get more data, if that's the pleasure of the board. Again, that's the pleasure of this board. But
well, I think we need to go ahead and do that and advertise our rates. And the rate is flexible. We can't go above what we advertise, but we can drop it back.
that's correct.
And so I think we should have a motion to proceed with that for our regular meeting. For public hearing. Is that with your?
Yeah. Again, the pleasure of the board. But if that's how the board would like to proceed.
So, Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion?
I think we need a motion.
Yeah,
I-
to hold the public hearing,
I
to
can do
advertise, we would need to do that for the tax rates and for the budget as modified and as presented. For well knowing, it can be amended, it can be dropped, etc. It can't be increased, but it can be dropped, it can be amended after those public hearings.
You're talking about the 61%.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, Mr.
Because
Chairman,
I have,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, please.
When you get through,
No, I was just gonna make the motion. What you have to say is important.
I agree with what Mike was saying, because I've talked to you about that before already. I'm not sure that the 61 cent with our citizens like they are today that's where we need to be at. But I understand and know that we need to go ahead and set the, because I like to hear, and I've been in enough of them, I'm pretty sure of what the citizens are gonna say anyway. Cause I mean, we keep talking about, and you made a statement that is exactly the way I was thinking. I think the rainy day's here. We've been talking about this rainy day fund. And I understand where you're coming from with this public safety and everything, but we're at a point now that if we are lucky, if we're gonna be able to keep up with what we've got. Because I don't have a clue, you don't have a clue, nobody in here, what our citizens, the taxpayers, the 56,000 people, where they're gonna be at. And I think some's gonna lose their, I believe that if there are businesses out there that were struggling, they're probably gonna go under. I believe that there was businesses out there that were talking about restructuring. This is where they're gonna restructure. And I believe all of that, and I think county government is gonna have to conform to whatever that is. And there's too many fictitious numbers today.
Too many variables.
Yep.
Too many
There's
variables.
too many fictitious numbers, variables, however how you want to put it, out there today for us to make any kind of a clear decision that we need to go ahead and do the advertising. But we definitely don't need to be in any kind of a big hurry. And I hear everybody here saying pretty much the same thing. I'm not sure that, you and I probably won't be together on that one. I'm not sure that 61 cents, and so therefore, there may even be some core services that are gonna have to be cut some.
Ronnie, would you think that the real estate would the 61 cent on real estate, if we looked at cutting maybe some of the personal property in, would that help more to the citizenry? And if we left the real estate at 61, to say if we put a reduction on the personal property, use some fund balance to maybe take up that slack for this year's budget and see where we're at. You know, like you said, we don't know if people are going to be able to pay the taxes this fall.
Well,
which one would help them the most, real estate cut or personal property?
And I can answer your question on my experience in the past. The real estate is one thing to cut, but personal property, to me, if you're going to do taxes or anything, to me, your personal property, you leave it alone.
Okay.
The reason I say that is you got a lot of people, and I can show you 2 places on the road I live on that people have bought and they built places, and they're there because of the lower taxes. You've got a lot of people that are renting that have boats, motorcycles, jet skis and stuff. Leave the taxes alone there. The real estate that they're the property owners that are carrying. It's just like the people that's paying the bills here for the taxes, or the ones that taxes come out of their check before they ever get it. So I think you gotta weigh all that out. I hope I answered your question the way I think.
I understand what you're saying, Tim.
Yeah,
That $2 million, we can use it.
You know, I was trying to figure out what's the best way that we can help our
Come up
people.
with that money to help the people.
And, you know, we've got, like, you know, our rainy day fund balance, in case you haven't noticed, it's raining pretty good. And especially on people, and we're all fortunate enough, you know, sitting here, it hadn't really, I mean, I know Mr. Carter, his business has taken a hit like a lot of other small business owners, and Mr. Mitchell same way. A lot of those guys that are fortunate enough to be, you know, drawing a pension, you know, we're blessed. But a lot of people in the county are really hurting with this. And I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way that we can do the least amount of damage up here, but help people out here.
Yes.
And would a real estate reduction or would a personal property reduction, which one would help the most?
Would be the most
And do the least amount of damage to Chris's budget.
So like a 3 penny would be about 1.8, 1.9 million on real estate, which you could use the 2 million in what we're calling rainy day funds.
for a year.
So that it doesn't change anything you presented today.
Yeah, just remember,
If
if you're gonna offset with fund balance and operating, you're gonna have to make sure you can recover it the next year.
I think
That is the slippery slope.
Well, we can recover it when we do the twice-a-year tax collection. So there's money in the pipeline, and I'll tell you all right now, if we do not cut the tax rate or come up with some way to help the citizens, I will not vote for the budget.
We gotta be mindful of our citizens, and I mean, we have been, I mean, we've said it all the time, it's been mentioned, we've been at the bottom of the list, you know, we're there. I know a lot of people, I said, 11 years ago when I came on board, cut some of this fat out of this budget. This budget's been cut, this budget's been cut. Buddy, I'm here to tell you. Now, is there, yeah, I think there is. I think there's some departments, y'all know how I feel about that get a lot of fat. And that it needs to be cut there some. But I'm telling you, this budget is pretty. And then when I go home and get my book and I can do some comparison numbers, I'm gonna see how much more Chris sharpens pencil when he did that. But,
Is that
you
accurate?
know, you're absolutely right, Lord, what you said, you gotta be careful. With that one-time money on how you spend it, you cannot do it for recurring expenses, you can't, you will.
It's irresponsible.
Exactly.
Well, I think we need to let the citizens know that, like, let's just use 3 cents. I'm just shooting from the hip here. I think the citizens know that when things get better and go back to some normalcy, that 3 cent tax increase is coming back.
How much of the 2 million, 2 million's not much
But
in our budget, how much of it do you plan to spend?
What I would recommend, hearing the consensus around the table, is if the board is interested in understanding any options that we could look at to provide relief to the citizens. And if we could ask Mr. Whitlow to do that, because what Mr. Whitlow is going to be able to do is to balance that request against what he knows within his departments. And anything we do at this point is going to come at a cost. And we certainly need Mr. Whitlow, I think, to help us understand what the options are. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would disagree that our citizens, they need a lifeline. We need to figure something out for our business community in particular. What it is, I don't know. We do not have any fat in this budget. It's very, very lean. Every penny on the tax rate is worth, what, about $660,000?
Yeah. But this budget does that. This is what is a lot of people don't understand. We leaving, if this board leaves the tax rate at 61%, like it is right now, it's still a tax increase of almost 5%, 4.7 as Tommy was talking. And so we're putting almost 5% tax increase on our citizens.
Some of them higher than that.
That's
some-
average.
That's the average.
That's
just the
average.
average.
yes,
Mine
sir.
went 13.
I can tell you, in my
Mine went
district,
13.
the averages go a lot higher.
And that right there, that's what we were talking about a while ago.
That's what
We
it's
are
about.
putting a tax burden and a tax increase on the people at a time that it doesn't need to be there. So
Well-
really, there's not been, keeping in mind at the 61 cent, there's still a lot of growth here. It's what, because you were talking, what was $2 million some dollars increase. It's not been I mean, to me, a level funding is exactly what you got last year, not a percentage.
I think, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Our lifeline is the fund balance. That's what we judged on the credit upon and everything. And Chris, when you started, I commend you, when you started the meeting last time, you said if it had to happen, that was a good time for it to happen. Because we're still in pretty good shape. I don't think fund balance would be touched. That is our lifeline. That is what the creditors look at, that's what everybody looks at, how good the health of the economy is, as far as Franklin County is. Now, as far as the other stuff, y'all been pretty pessimistic. I'm optimistic. I think once the governor lifts this thing up, I think we're gonna be in good shape. Now, I'm not saying people don't need help. I'm not saying that at all. But I think right now, we done sold up gloom and doom. We need to get back to the county itself, and that is everybody. How are we gonna help everybody? I know the business may need help, all this stuff, but what are we gonna do for the county as a whole? Well, I'm strongly against messing with fund balance, because that is our lifeline.
I think, Mr. Cundiff, if I'm not mistaken, I think the discussion was around the approximate $2 million that's over and above our 20%.
I know that, but
Yeah.
I still don't think it should
Yeah.
be bothered. I still don't
Okay.
think fund balance should be bothered, period.
I have a question for Mr. Thompson. Yeah, and I want to make sure I was clear. I used the 3 pennies as just an example. I want to make sure I'm clear. We're all talking about helping the citizens. How else would we help them other than lowering, say, the real estate tax? I'm confused because I think we're talking about lowering some tax rate to help the citizens, but at the same time, we don't want to use the $2 million. So how do we come up with, what ideas do you guys have with your experience to try to?
We have not, leaving it at 61% the rate. We have not lowered taxes at all.
I know, that's why I'm
We've
suggesting
increased-
lowering
we've
3
increased-
pennies.
We've increased taxes because this is where they done the reassessments.
I understand that.
In order, we've got to find out what the numbers are today. You see, and if we take it back, that's what that 4.7% was that he was talking. That would make us even. So that's where it is.
I understand.
On your tax ticket. It showed on your tax ticket what you paid last year. It
It's
showed
gonna
on
go up
there
this year.
whether your went up or down, what that was, and how much of an increase or a decrease. Some people.
You don't have to explain it to me.
That's where that's from.
I understand how it works. Leaving it, everything is based off leaving it at 61 cents. What I'm saying, if we're all talking about trying to help the citizens of this county, we've got to take money from somewhere if we're going to lower the tax rate to help our citizens. I use 3 pennies as an example, which would eat up that extra $2 million above and beyond the fund balance. I'm clear as mud here. That's all. That's what I'm suggesting. If we're going to help them, we have to pull the money from somewhere to be able to help the citizens.
Well, and Mr. Mitchell, I think a point of clarification, if I may, Mr. Chairman, if we don't touch fund balance, like Mr. Cundiff is recommending, what we're essentially telling Mr. Whitlow is that if we lower that tax rate or any tax rate by anything, the budget that you're seeing today, the modified budget, is going to have to be decreased by whatever number we allocate to make a meaningful difference. And that's the question. What is a meaningful difference, and can we afford it in a budget and deliver services? That's the key. There's the balance. Because we are on the verge of having to look at a list of potentially cut services if things don't pan out the way we all hope they do.
Well, I think our discussion was holding a public hearing and advertising the tax rate. I don't think we're looking at setting a tax rate today.
I think you've got to set it for the 19th. We'll have to advertise a certain rate.
We've advertised a certain rate,
Yeah.
which I think we're comfortable in advertising that rate at 61 cents. And,
I'm not comfortable
you
with it.
know, well, what do you want, I mean,
It can come down.
we can come down.
We can lower it after we hear from the
No, we
citizens.
cannot go up.
Do you think we have any citizen that's not going to need our help right now? I mean, I understand what you're saying. I know I'm new here at this, but all I'm saying is Mike Carter said it perfect. That $2 million, that's above and beyond the fund balance. That is our citizens' money. And now's the time to use it. And I don't think we should cut any services and make our county administrator go back to the drawing board and cut departments right now.
Well, one thing you're gonna be looking at, you're gonna have a 2 million shortage next year that you're gonna have to cover with something.
And once again, I said we need to let the citizens know that once things go back to normal and the economy rebounds, they should expect that 3-cent tax to come back to 61 cents.
So, Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion that the board proceed to our May 19th meeting to set a tax rate of real estate of 61 cents. And, let's see, what else? And personal property rate at,
All the rates are,
all the rates
all
will
the
remain
existing
static.
rates will remain.
Yeah, with all the tax rates remaining static. And that the board hold a public hearing on the 19th so that we may hear from the citizenry with potential work session to follow.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? All in favor of the motion, and Madam Clerk, would you read it?
Was that the motion or roll call vote?
No, would you read the motion, so?
Yes. Supervisor Smith made a motion to advertise the tax rates remaining static, so those would be published in the paper and they're not going to be changed from last year. And also the budget as modified, which was presented today. That was made by Supervisor Smith and seconded by Supervisor Tatum.
Okay, you've heard the motion, all in favor? Aye? Opposed? Motion passes. Okay.
And just to follow up on that discussion, good discussion. I know this is not easy discussions for staff, it's not easy discussions for the board, it's not easy discussions for our citizens. I mean, it's just not. No one wants to be in this position. We are all trying to work through it. As we said, we value the public's feedback, and that public hearing being on May the 19th. I'm sure board members would appreciate citizen input with that public hearing on May the 19th. And as Mr. Chairman, as you noted, following May 19th public hearing, we can have more work sessions, we can bring back additional data to get into those core service discussions. I will leave you with something to think about today as we think about rates, as we think about local funding revenue. This funded budget is based on assumptions of state revenue for our school system that was originally adopted by the General Assembly. We do know the General Assembly will reconvene in July, likely, with new projections. If the Commonwealth of Virginia cuts further into localities' budgets, keep in mind 53% of our budget is based on state revenue. If they get cut further and it's further in, this discussion is not over in terms of, just always be thinking about, that's all I leave you with, be thinking about a fallback position come August and September, even if we are looking at fund balance or rate adjustments, because at that point, we have to go somewhere.
And we'll already be, we've got to do a budget before we actually gonna know what the numbers are.
Right. And so again, this is a strategic pause. Budgets can be amended. They're fluid. As numbers go up, and again, I hope, Mr. Cundiff, I hope you're correct and use some optimism.
He is correct.
And use some optimism there. But I'm also a realist, knowing that we have to be mindful of continually monitoring our budgets weekly and monthly, and it can go the other direction. And we have to be prepared that that could be the case.
Mr. Whitlow, if I can just add a couple footnotes to my earlier request.
Yes.
If there are any comments to be made or evaluated regarding our debt service and what the implications in debt service could be as we consider all of these other things, as well as external agencies.
Yeah, excellent point, and we have had discussions with Davenport, our financial advisors, and actually looking to bring you back a possible proposal where we can refinance some of our debt service to capture those annual savings that can possibly assist.
That was one of my questions.
That's another rock that we're overturning and we're looking at.
There's where the money could be passed over to citizens.
What's that?
The refinance, save the money there, there's where the money can go to there, that's what we were talking about.
I mentioned like FEMA loans and stuff like that. Y'all keep that on loans?
$2 million.
Yeah, if we can still get Snow Creek here a new tanker, I wanna get it.
Mr. Whitlow, what is in that supervisor's fund? How much money?
In that contingency fund,
Yeah.
we've set aside next year 100,000.
What do we typically do with that?
In years past, it's been used for a host of things. If there were an emergency on the county side or the school side, in terms of there was a capital project or something went awry or amiss. In addition, it's been utilized for things in terms of external agencies. If external agencies have got themselves into a jam and there was something and it wasn't budgeted during the year, because everything in a budget, as you know, is tightly and neatly squared away, or at least it used to be, early on. And of course, during the middle of the year, there's nowhere to go, if you will. That amount has always been there for that. Now, it's varied. That amount has actually dropped significantly through the years. We've now recognized the need, and again, more your question earlier, to start building that back up for those emergency purposes.
That's where that Warren Street Festival
Well,
money came
I
from.
don't remember
That's where that came.
And with the school's budget, it's gonna be interesting to see what the General Assembly does with re-benchmarking
Yes.
the SOQs. That could have everything to do, or will, in all likelihood, because that's where the increase was coming
What's coming from?
How much carryover are they gonna have?
I had a discussion, not known yet, Mr. Tatum, great question. Spoke with Dr. Church earlier. They do not know that amount yet. What he did tell me, of course, they're unsure in terms of their state revenues now for the remainder of the fiscal year. There are some federal stimulus dollars for schools. All of that information in detail really hasn't necessarily been vetted or released yet through the state in terms of what can those dollars be used for. Is that to supplant any revenue losses in the state school in the school system this year? I do know the stimulus fund, the CARES Act, does not supplant local dollars for a local budget. I'm not sure with the school stimulus dollars. The devil's in the details there. I did talk to Dr. Church earlier. He has shared, of course, obviously when schools aren't in session, there are no substitutes. The buses are not running. He feels fairly certain that they will be okay to balance like us for the rest of this fiscal year. In terms of next year, he's like anybody else and every other superintendent. They don't know what the state re-benchmarking or not, or what may happen. So,
I have a question. I think Chairman and Vice Chairman can help answer this one. So if we're looking at level funding for next fiscal year, if these departments come in with leftover funds, do we give that back to them? Do we let them keep those leftover funds? Are we going to take what's left over from them?
typically, we don't do that necessarily now, Mr. Mitchell, but typically in the budget process, if there's a surplus of funds from various county departments, it's all put into one big category of what we call carryover at the end of the year. And typically around September, October, we typically bring that back to the board. And it's primarily been used for capital items, one-time expenditures that we couldn't get to. So things
Like a school bus.
like a school bus or a fire truck, although we've probably never had enough to buy a fire truck with carryover.
I think we will.
But those extra surplus dollars are used for those one-time capital expenditures, and we normally just group all those back together. Now, what we try to do primarily with the departments is be very mindful if a specific department, if it was not been able to be funded in the current year budget, if they had enough and they carried it over to next year and we couldn't get to that expenditure last year, if it's a one-time thing, we'll try to make a recommendation in September and October, but that's typically how it's done. But it doesn't necessarily roll back to the departments.
Do you remember what the ADM is per student for the school?
Not off the top of my head, Mr. Mitchell, in terms of the per pupil funding from the state.
You know, like, where they are losing, what did I see,
175.
That's quite a bit of money that.
Yes, sir.
that they will be short of.
I wanna say maybe 10 or 11K,
Yeah.
could be a little less than that. Yes,
We'll check. We'll get that number for you.
But, you know, it's sizable money for them.
one thing that I'll remind the board of, as Mr. Mitchell and I continue to meet with the school board members, we have asked them, and I don't know whether this has gotten back to Dr. Church or not, but we've asked them for we have asked for their carryover number to be broken out. And what we've asked for is it to be broken out from operational carryover pre-virus, and then a number broken out for savings with the virus, like not running full-scale school buses, anything and everything. So, I don't know if Dr. Church has indicated that to you or not, but that number to me, and Mr. Mitchell, you may want to speak to this, I think that number will be very instructive to us, because their normal carryover always has to be a question for reappropriation, and how we are going to deal with potentially increased number, which I do expect, of some magnitude, and what that means to the request for reappropriation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think you were going to tell me something when I asked about leftover funds.
Years ago, we used to, that's where they were talking about it, was, that the leftover funds went back to them, and I asked for the meeting minutes when that was done, and it never existed. It was more or less just done, but my opinion on that is these department heads make big money to come up with ways to save money, to be efficient, not to spend it. And I have never understood why county staff can tell us a number about carryover this time of the year, and schools can't.
They may.
Huh? Of course they know.
In May,
They
they
just
know.
won't do it. They already know what it is. They just won't do it, and that's a problem. And it comes back, and it's like this time, there was no carryover funds. And we said they didn't get it because they're spending county funds and saving state and federal funds. And then they want to talk about, we need to work together. We need to work together. So when they gonna start working together? That's always been my argument and what I'm saying. These teachers, the people out there, they're killing themselves. They're killing themselves. And the administrators are getting that, what's that paper that you got, what was like 33% raise. There's where the problems are. It's not with the ones doing the work. There's where your problems are with schools. And it's the only department, if any other department in Franklin County was losing like 157 students, if anybody else was doing that like that, you'd be fussing, why are we giving them more? Why are we giving them more? Now that's my question. Why do you have to have more when you got less?
Well, that's something I think Mr. Mitchell and I have made crystal clear, is I don't feel that this board, or even the previous board, really has been given an adequate explanation about the decline in ADM as it relates back to the school's budget. And they agree with me on that. There's really not been an adequate explanation. I read back to a couple of years of narratives. Some of the answers are right there in Dr. Church's narratives, but it's not getting communicated. And I think that we're encouraging them to have that kind of dialogue with us moving forward.
And what's the real FTE number?
I would say school safety has a big part in why so many parents are homeschooling now. And one of the reasons why I brought up the school resource officers. You spend $600,000-700,000 there, and if there's $10,000 a kid we're losing 150 kids. We only need 60 more kids to enroll to make up that difference. I think school safety has a lot to do with why so many kids are being homeschooled now.
I think you're gonna see an increase in homeschool after this is over, because a lot of parents over the last month have seen that they can do it, and it's not the end of the world. I think our public schools are gonna see an issue there, and they're gonna look to us to pick up the slack.
It might be the other way around too, because some parents want to get their kids back to school. Well, one of my friends tells me he called to see if his kid would pass or fail if they just stopped doing their work. It's time to put them back in school.
Chris, if you would go ahead and.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there's one other item this afternoon, and we really set aside today really just for the budget work session with the board. However, this is more time sensitive. This has been an issue, it's a statewide issue, and of course I am not the expert in this. That's why Brian Carter is here to explain this to you. It's not specific or germane to Franklin County, it is a statewide issue. It's dealing with bank franchise taxes. Specifically, there was one bank specifically in Virginia over the last several years that were not paid or assessed from all of the localities, and they are due funds. And this came to the county's attention in February. Brian Carter's worked with our legal counsel, who's also worked with the state, the county, the local government attorneys association in Virginia. They've all worked on this to reach a conclusion. If there's any silver lining in any of this, is that rather than the localities and the state owing the specific bank interest over the last several years on a payment that should have been made years ago, they're just needing the payment. We do have sufficient funds to cover the payment, but I do think it requires some legal action in terms of a public hearing. And so, Brian, I don't know how bad I bombed that, but that's your introduction.
Yes, you're exactly right, Mr. Whitlow. So, I mean, the first thing is this packet, which the Commonwealth seal at the top. This is the letter that Ms. Torrance received and sent to the local commissioners of the revenue back in February, really the 1st of March by the time we received it. And what this basically says is from the state tax commissioner is that BB&T has filed amended returns for the 2012, 13, and 14 tax years. And the state tax commissioner has agreed with their modified and lowered amended tax returns. So what that means is the state is refunding BB&T their portion, and each local commissioner of revenue needs to refund BB&T the local portion of bank franchise taxes. So on the last page of your printout is the table that is applicable in Franklin County. This one. And it's $58,000. So we've worked with Mr. Gwynn's office and Mike Lockerbie especially to try and make sure we had to pay this and all this was on the up and up. Should we do anything else? Well, all said and done, to save you all of the other details, the answer is yes. The answer is we have to pay it. The original tax commissioner's order was with interest, going all the way back to 2012. We balked at that. That's kind of been, I won't say forgiven, but delayed at this point, hence the time-sensitive issue. We don't want to go back and accrue interest for the last 8 years. So this is to give you the background on why we are where we are with this. What is the other item that has the coloring on it is the recommended revised change to our county code to allow for this, because as our Mr. Gwynn's office started researching, we really had no refund procedure. So part of our process was, well, you have 3 years to appeal it, and that's true. But if you did, there's no cap, there's no procedure that where our commissioner could interject. So this new section, which is 20-4, procedure for refund of taxes erroneously paid, is not just, if you notice, it's in Article 1 in general. It's not just for bank franchise tax. This is to the county code. If any taxes assessed by the Commissioner of Revenue are deemed to need to be refunded, this would be the changes to the county code. which really just says that if they went through the process, they appealed, they determined it, they have 3 years to do it, it's capped, if you look at section C under 20-4 at $2,500 for the erroneous assessment, so we wouldn't be paying $58,000 at this point. The penalty and interest can be delayed or forgiven in certain circumstances. But that is ultimately what it's saying. In order to make this change, the recommendation from Mr. Gwynn's office is that, one, they want a certification from our commissioner, and I've worked with Ms. Torrance, we're working on that for your May 19th meeting. And Mr. Gwynn's office is going to certify, yes, the refund is due. We need to authorize payment back to BB&T for $58,000. But as a county code cleanup item, they also wanted us to hold a public hearing to set this straight for this one and future periods, for how we would handle these. So the public hearing is really to allow it to happen, and then of course any questions the staff can bring any more information to you. But all of this is ultimately to get BB&T $58,000 before they start making us pay interest. Yes, sir.
Isn't there a statute of limitations on this? There is a statute of limitations on how far back I can go to file my taxes.
That was the issue. So there's a 3-year statute of
That's what I
limitations.
thought.
And our original rebuttal of what we got from the state tax commissioner was, there's a 3-year statute of limitations. 2012 through 14 are done and gone.
Yeah.
Why are we paying this? Well, apparently BB&T filed with the state on time. The state has drugged their.
They did their letter of intent on
Yeah.
within the statute of limitations.
Yes, and BB&T actually submitted something in our local commissioner's office, which really wasn't a refund request, but it was something that our attorneys are saying passes as notification, so they met that requirement. It's taken this long to get it through the state process.
All right, now,
Yes.
with that being there, let me ask you this question. The Commissioner of Revenue is a constitutional officer,
Yes.
and then it's a state. Why, this is the state's bill. If they're the ones that delayed it, didn't come up, why are we having to pay it? Why not the state of Virginia having to do it? Because they're the ones dragging their feet.
Well, we agree. What's getting out BB&T and the state out of that responsibility is the notice that commissioners received in 2015 saying, hey, we filed an amended return with the state. We're notifying you that there may be some payment back to us. Unfortunately, that was 2015. 5 years later, we're just now giving the state tax commissioners.
I understand all that, but why isn't this dumped in the state's lap? Why we gotta pay for it?
Not agree.
When you read these numbers.
Yeah, the state basically said, the state does pay their portion of the bank franchise tax. They're refunding whatever the state portion is, but from the local perspective, the state is saying, localities pony up, this is your portion.
But the key question is, when did the clock start ticking on the 3-year statute?
Well, it's after you file. So for each year when you file, you have 3 years to notify of an amended return. For BB&T's purposes, they notified us within 3 years. That 2015 notice would have covered 2014, 13, and 12. The issue is the delay at the state more than it is at this point BB&T's process.
You don't have to file the suit, but you do have to do a letter of intent that you intend to do it. That's what that is. My question was, the other day, is the state's the one that messed this up, not the county. Why don't the state have to pay this instead of the county?
The likelihood of them paying is some money, right?
The state's not going to pay it. And then that was where we were going with Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Lockerbie was, we were going to basically fight it and say, sorry, state, this is your bill. We're not going to pay it as localities. And no other attorney really with that notice as more information was received to say we don't have a case, so localities just have to pay it. So this is the recommendation, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Lockerbie.
Where are we getting the money?
For contingency. I'm sorry.
How long, how far does the board contingency go, for goodness sake?
But really what we would do is just net this
Board
out.
contingency.
We would net this out of the current year bank franchise tax. So it would be a reduction to our current year revenue. That's probably the best way from an accounting perspective to handle it. but it reduces our overall revenue regardless.
And
Yes, it makes
this
sense.
is,
It's wrong.
It's done, we need to write the check, but
it is
yeah,
wrong.
it's pretty much
This is
done.
wrong. This is communism.
We're not too happy about it. It
Council-
could come at a worse time for locality budgets. If you look at some of the others, the town of Rocky Mount has to pay 40,000 as a percent of their budget. It's a huge deal for them more than it
This
is.
right here, I'm not saying that, I mean, if the money, the 58,000, what's wrong about it is we didn't have proper notification. If you owe the money, that's one thing, but we didn't have in its statutes and procedures in place.
Do we have any room,
Oh,
Chris or Brian, to talk to Charles Poindexter, David Superline, Mr. Stanley? Because, I mean, the state is acknowledging, pushing back deadlines and, every level of funding there is being looked at, everything's on the table. And so now they're gonna come back, they're gonna allow BB&T to come back, and the state's coming back at us for a chunk of change at the most inopportune time. So I'm just wondering if we could ask for some relief. I mean, if they're gonna drag their feet, let's just ask any and all questions we have. Are we under statutory timeline to get this done?
No, the ruling didn't say we had to pay it by a certain date. What we want to be careful of is just that we don't drag our feet enough to where we have to then pay the back interest. And that's where we wanted to get it done. We were originally going to bring this at the April meeting and pushed it to the May meeting because of some of those revenue issues and seeing if BB&T would be okay with it. The message we got at that point was they're not really pushing this, so we probably gonna have a few more months, maybe of grace, but BB&T has not confirmed that. So as staff, we wanted to be conservative and get it in front of you to say probably best to go ahead and pay the bill.
Sometimes silence ain't gold. Just cause they're quiet don't mean they plot yes.
I think we ought to talk to Charles Poindexter. I really do.
But we can certainly work with Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Lockerbie and say,
I don't like this again. This, we may have to pay it, but I think it ought to go to court. Because I don't think proper procedure is followed.
Is BB&T the only banks that are receiving this? So are
This
they the only
particular-
bank that didn't get paid?
this particular issue is BB&T. Any bank can file for an amended return. This particular one is only related to BB&T.
Well, I tell you, this is gonna be the beginning if this gets out. Everybody and their brothers wants to jump in on this bandwagon.
Well, I think probably most of your smaller banks don't have the issues. BB&T is claiming, in the whole calculation, I don't even do the taxes, but they're claiming that with the net capital factor they're using and mergers with subsidiaries, all of those accounting things that people like to use has ended up with a surplus for them. And so that means that their tax burden wasn't as high as they projected, which means we owe them a refund. You wouldn't have this necessarily, nor have we talked to Ms. Torrance. And, the only one in our borders is BB&T that's of any size that we typically have this type of issue with.
So what's your recommendation?
Recommendation of staff, if you want it later, we'll follow up a little bit more with Ms. Poindexter and the subline, but which is paid.
I think the other piece is that we could go ahead and do the housekeeping item of amending the ordinance. Because that's not gonna have any bearing on what we're doing now. It's not gonna be retroactive.
Correct. These two are not hand in hand. The ordinance is to kind of take this and learn from it and update our code. The actual approval is a separate action item. You're correct. So we'd like to at least get that public hearing done at the May meeting so it's out of the way.
I'll make a motion that we go to the public hearing with the amendment. But I want to go on record saying I am not for paying this bill.
Okay.
That's just me. The rest of y'all can say what you want to, but I am not for just handing BB&T $58,000 because I do not believe that they followed the proper procedure. Now, that on the notification, the Commonwealth of Virginia owes this bill, not Franklin County. Ronnie Thompson's opinion.
I'll second this motion, and I agree with his opinion.
Okay,
Staff
and
is too.
I don't feel like we need any more discussion.
So what are we exactly voting on, the revision to the county code?
Just the
Setting
public
a
hearing.
public hearing.
Yeah, just the public hearing to revise the county code.
That doesn't have anything to do with the BB&T?
No.
No, at the May meeting, we would have to vote to approve that anyway, but this cleans up the code to allow us to come back in a future situation and have something to fall back on.
I'm gonna tell you something, if you ever been audited, income tax, you might as well go ahead and clean your house.
I just want to make sure they're not connected, because I was chairman of the local bank board during all this, and a stockholder of record, so they're two separate things.
Now,
Two separate things.
Okay.
And I will make one comment, I wouldn't drag my feet too far on that.
that's my,
It's a big company with deep pockets, and if they've gone to all this trouble, they're gonna want their money.
Like I said, if you ever been audited income tax, you better go ahead and sweep it out, get it done, put it behind you, let's roll. Go ahead and, I'm just opposite, let's go on, pay it, get it done, because what's it gonna cost in lawyer fees? What's it gonna cost in administrative fees? What's it gonna cost to do all this? So, you know, that's not I know 58,000 is not money, but still, it ain't much compared to corporates. But that's
But
what
it's
it
not
is.
Fairfax, it's $1.5 million.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion as Madam Clerk has read. All in favor, aye. All opposed? So we will have a public hearing, and,
So Stractor Lane, Texas.
I guess Mr. Thompson here about our crime chief.
He said you're gonna be our prime speaker.
My only thing is, I don't think, we may owe the bill, but I don't think we were given the proper notification. I don't think it was done right, and because of that, I don't think we owe the money. I think the Commonwealth of Virginia does this. They're the one that didn't do their job.
Okay.
I'm not arguing about the money.
Mr. Chair.
$58,000.
We got
Sheriff's been
Sheriff.
very patient. Can we go ahead
Let's hear from him before we go.
Okay.
Mr. Whitlow, did you have anything else?
I have nothing else.
Are you sure?
You should have heard, sure there's something you want to ask us, I mean, sure, I'm waiting.
I'm good. Thank you all. Thank you all. We'll
Oh, you got it.
hold public hearing on May 19th and hear from the public, and thereafter, we've took good notes today, and we're overturning rocks. So we understand.
Very good. Thank you all very much. I'll make this very brief to get to Mr. Tatum's question, and certainly Mr. Cundin's as well. Initially, when we really started to hear about the COVID, and we certainly put in an action plan for the sheriff's office threat levels, and we are at threat level 3 as we have imposed, which is the most serious, and that certainly is protection of our assets, personnel. You know, that's one of the things we had to really weigh. What if some of our folks were to come down with the virus and then contamination, and what that could viably mean? And I think that's a discussion worth having future, not only for my staff, but certainly public safety, those folks at 911 that are on the front lines 24/7. But so we're at threat level 3, and we did see a decrease in our calls. But as the weather is starting to change, and to be quite honest with you, the more calls I'm fielding now is people just becoming concerned and that government is at an overreach. And tempers and could easily flare very quickly. I don't know what the governor proposed today at 2 o'clock. I know last Friday he proposed May 8th to lighten some restrictions for certain non-essential that were initially characterized as non-essential to start segueing. And I believe at the end of the day, what he's going to say today, we all know that as the pattern increases, and I believe there's viable, just as this is my opinion, there's viable understanding of rural areas versus a metropolitan, more urban area, and how that looks like. I believe social distancing is going to be a part of that, and that practice of how you open up your businesses or whatever it may be, and still trying to accomplish that. But we are seeing our calls intensify. We're seeing our numbers in illegal substances, tremendous growth. I mean, our folks in that area, we've almost had to pull back the reins a little bit as far as going from buys to what is the next process, because there was so many, and still trying to protect each of those individuals that are working that with their contacts. Is that a trend? I don't know. I do know that there was an article in last week's paper where both the chief in Roanoke City and the chief of Roanoke County, which I think is worth us listening to, because we understand when just a year ago or 2 years ago, we were talking about the number of overdoses here that were in the rural sections. You just didn't talk about the urban sections then. You were talking that these were happening in our rural communities as well. And both of those departments are recognizing that their death rate from overdose are more substantial this year right now than they were this time last year. So I don't know what that means. They even in the article talked about the fentanyl, which we're still believing that's an issue. Here locally, we're dealing more with methamphetamine, two conflicting differences in substances there that you're talking about. But we do see that number increasing. We see the number of mental health issues increasing. I agree. I want to be very optimistic of what this means for us moving forward. July 1, when the new gun law is going to effect, that is a concern. I don't know what issues. We're certainly now debating and talking about policy and procedures as it relates to those new laws. You all have certainly had information inquired of you and contacts made of you of the organization of a local militia, and those are things that we're continuing to digest and talk to and work through as well. But in particular, one of the things I do want to mention is last week, well, not quite 2 weeks, we had an after-action review recently. We had a barricaded subject incident that became very labor-intensive as far as manpower resources. And a decision was made, as you all are making decisions as it affects funding, pocketbooks, boy, I can't appreciate any more than your responsibility that you have. And I know you take it very serious, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you appreciate me as greatly as I appreciate you in the fact of me having to make a decision that ultimately could have taken a life. And we had to make that decision. And unfortunately, this person was dealing with mental health and substance abuse. And to have grandparents and parents looking at me saying, we understand you've got to do things, but please try to, for them to be kept, taken in safely, which is very difficult. The decisions had to be made. I only come to you to say in that regard, as we are finalizing this year-end budget, we're like everyone else. We've responded to Mr. Whitlow's request of the 2.5% to 5% and 7.5%. But we also realize that in doing so, this has really made us aware of a woefully ill area of being prepared that we are, and that's in our emergency response team. These are individuals that get no stipend, get no extra pay. We ask them to do their regular jobs, but then we ask them to be specialized and trained to go into these high-risk situations. This individual that we went in the other night fired twice into a door that could have, it didn't penetrate, but it could have, had it hit a high-powered rifle inside the room as well. But it didn't penetrate the door, but there was personnel on the other side that are, and had equipment that have passed the expiration dates. Everything we do, there's liabilities, there's, and unfortunately, there's equipment, that those equipment have dates that end as far as what the manufacturer is going to guarantee or uphold. We have to continue to use some of these things, not just my department, public safety as well, because we need to give some added protection, but certainly there's liability if something happens. So we are looking at, and certainly so, Mr. Whitlow put up that we do believe there's some essential things that we need to utilize funding that we have. We're not asking for any new funding right now, but utilize that funding if the county staff does see some of these bills coming through to shore up some of those areas where we feel are woefully inadequate for us to do the job we need to do. If in, we're praying it does it, but more of these type of calls and situations were to intensify. I believe we would all agree, if you all are saying we're in a rainy day and everybody is experiencing, you all have heard stories, I deal with the aftermath when somebody snaps, when enough's enough. Whether it's a neighbor that they've had trouble with, they just didn't get along, but then all of a sudden you manifest all this other stuff, potentially of a job loss, potentially of a divorce, potentially of just so many things. When they snap or something happens drastic, that's when we get the call to go. And that's what we've got to be prepared to handle the situation, to protect the staff of the sheriff's office, and certainly to bring and protect those that we're actually trying to bring to a good conclusion that will be satisfactory to everyone. Moving on to one other thing I want to speak about. The 911 center, I can appreciate what Mr. Thompson brought up and what you all were talking about, the carryover funds. We're very familiar with how that works. You all have been very good to us over the years in looking at carryover. I think we've been very good, and hopefully, at least I'll push it to my staff to be very mindful of the funds that we expend and what we utilize. Ms. Foley with the 911 center have really been looking really hard since the tornado touched down last April. Who would ever imagine a year ago that we had a tornado touch down and did the devastation that it did? But she recognized at that time that the 911 center in our community at times could be very vulnerable. So looking toward the future and what that meant, she had started putting in plan the fact of having our 911 center being portable, mobile, that we could actually take the center to any of our fire or EMS stations, and with a VPN, and help me, John, if I'm not technical savvy as she is and John, but if we had a VPN address, we could certainly operate and do the things that run the CAD system just like a 911 center. We have an EOC center at Public Safety, but that's woefully inadequate now as far as they can answer radio, but they cannot tone out tone alerts if you needed the fire EMS from the EOC. But even since that model was put in place, technology has moved so now that you would think the portability and the mobility of a 911 center would be much greater. Having said that, Ms. Foley had started putting in place measurements of kind of trying to keep some monies in reserve to look to doing that. And then here all of a sudden in January, February, now the COVID situation arises. Who would have ever thought we were dealing with that? That doesn't have so much of a direct input with what I'm talking about of the mobility, but it does. If the center were to become contaminated, what does that mean? And you know, different scenarios that may exist from that. But it makes you think we have got to be prepared for any of those situations that come up. It's too late once you get in the middle of this, and then I have the ability to do it. And I gravely tell you, there's nothing more irresponsible than if we have a time when the 911 center is not available. That is the lifeline for people to make that call for help, and we've got to keep it. And you all already know that. I will say this, Ms. Foley has told me, irregardless of what the county that you all may decide to do in the future with the 911 center upgrade, you all have discussed that. We fully support that needs to be done. This would not be a measure as far as a Band-Aid just to get us that point. This would be part of what that upgrade looks like. Still having the availability to go portable or mobile with our 911 center. Having said that, Ms. Foley has the money in her budget for this year to start that process and segue into 2020-21 budget cycle if you were not to take money out of the existing budget that's in there for that particular line items that she has. We can wait, as you all have talked about it, you know, was a couple of months, but it would be detrimental to us if we waited and then all of a sudden that money drifted and found itself somewhere else, because we do believe that 911 center is vital and what that means. Having said that, the last item I'd like to mention to you is our in-car cameras and our body cameras. Kind of the same situation. We have put money aside as the year has gone along to upgrade that system, and we're in a good shape, we believe, to do a 5-year non-interest program to upgrade that system. But we need to make sure that our regular line items through our capital for in-car cameras and body cameras stays intact as well as 2 line items for our radio stay intact, which is roughly about $50,000. I appreciate Mr. Carter and Mr. Whitlow as we've had discussions with them. Understandably that as they talk about these things, the unknown, as you all have mentioned, it's just hard to commit. But I just wanted to bring it before the board and let you all know from my perspective how important these items are. And again, it's not any new monies, but it's just making sure those funds continue and would with a level funded budget, plus the fact that that capital of 30,000 and then the other 20,000 stays intact and it's not removed, we would be able to proceed with that. Again, what is the importance of cameras? I can tell you the public has come to expect it, just because it's the most instantaneous people say when they look at something that's happened. What did the video say? Whether it's a video of a business, whether it's a video that we have from our cameras, that's the first thing the public asks. So from a liability sense, I believe it's very important for us to keep that program moving forward. I thank you all for allowing me to speak. I know it's a little bit off of your agenda, but I'm like you, I'm elected by the people, and I certainly get my funding from you. And I think it's important for me to come before you and answer any questions you all have in regard to that funding. But I plead with you to, and I know you will, because I know I'm singing to the choir, because I've spoken to just about every one of you, and you all are very supportive of public safety and the sheriff's office, those first responders on the line. And as important as all of the things are, I look toward you all for your support, and we support those individuals to make sure that they're kept safe, that they can continue to do the things that they do so good each and every day.
Sure. Just a couple of comments. Director Ferguson, on just about a daily basis, sends us an email giving us a COVID-19 update, and then he gives us a monthly update. Could you have either Captain Young or Major Sigmund maybe send us something by email on it don't have to be daily, maybe a weekly basis to keep us in the flow of how things are going, and that way things don't build up. We kind of stay ahead. And for something that you feel or that we need to know, give us an email to keep us moving so that we keep in touch.
Most definitely, I think we'd be glad to do that.
And also to speak to some of what you just shared with us, I served on the sheriff's office TAC team for 23 years, and I know over the years, and I can remember the sheriff's father having to beg, borrow, and steal from everywhere he could to get equipment for the TAC team, and like I said, you hope you never have to use some of that equipment, but lives be at stake if you don't have the right equipment and training. I would like to see us make a operational line item for the TAC team for the sheriff. I know we don't have the funds to throw a lot of money into it right now, but if we can at least create the item, and if we can put some money into it and make it so that it's non-transferable, you don't transfer it, it don't get used, it don't go and get used for something else. It has to be specific for training and equipment for the TAC team, but it would be an automatic carryover item. So if you don't use it this year, it would carry over. Or say a big ticket item come down that you may need to see the need for, and you could be saved for 2 or 3 years, you could build up to make a purchase. I like to see us increase and at least have that item there. And this, my idea was maybe putting $15,000 or $20,000 into it to start with. I don't know the numbers. I'll leave that up to Chris. But I'd like to see us at least have that line in your operations for the TAC team, for equipment and training for the TAC team. And as money is available, put it in there and we can adjust as needed.
I thank you for that. And as you were sitting there explaining that, Mr. Tatum, it was just dawned on me. And again, and Mr. Whitlow has said it time and time again, public safety is not it's a very expensive thing to get involved in. And whether you're talking about oxygen packs that firefighters need to go in, whatever it may be, and all of those things have expiration dates to them that you have to meet. As you were saying, even when you say $20,000, that seems like a lot of money, but after 10 members, that's $2,000 per member. Helmet, which is a critical piece of equipment, to not even really include the communication pieces that they've got to have, because these individuals are working just as firefighters are in areas of where there could be sight, there could be barriers, and communication is just such an integral part. I mean, you could be talking $2,000, just in very 2 or 3 items. So $2,000 is not a large amount for the gear and the equipment that these folks utilize.
What we could maybe do, Mr. Tatum, depending upon Mr. Carter and Mr. Whitlow's recommendation, is maybe set up a reserve that's dedicated to the sheriff's office for specifically. I mean, if you want to deal with it with specificity for the tactic, or whether you want it to be an equipment reserve for the sheriff's office, I don't know. But I think a reserve might be the mechanics, potentially. Is that right, Mr.?
Probably what I'm hearing, if you want it carried over, you're probably talking about a capital funding line item.
Yeah.
We had one for a tactical team, which was the vests, but that was really limited just the vests. We had to defund that. The issue is we just took $200,000 out of capital and can't fund what we have now. So that's going to be the issue of getting money in that funding mechanism, but it solves the issue of being able to carry over unspent funds year after year in a much easier way to manage.
I think we need to create the reserve. It needs to be a part of our budget process. Is that what you're suggesting, Mr. Taylor?
I want to play devil's advocate here. And I'm not opposed to what you just presented, but I'm telling you, if you do it for one, you got to do it for all. How we're going to do it, just keep it in mind.
Yeah, if it's a public safety issue that deals something this specific, then if we need to do it for all, then we need to do it. But I think we can't we see a need here that's been identified, we need to address that need.
I'm not arguing with you on it at all. I'm not arguing with you. I agree with what you're saying 100%. Gotta have that clear up front. I agree. But how can we do it for one and not do it for all? When the public schools come back and they want this, and somebody else comes back and they want that, how do we do it for one and not do it for all?
We're talking about helmets and vests and tactical.
I don't care what we're talking about.
Here's your
We're talking about
answer.
carrying over money.
Here's your answer. We take each one of them as an individual need and address them accordingly on an individual requested basis. The sheriff has come in and has shown this need, and we are taking the measures to address that need. If Dr. Church comes in and says, we need this here, then we look at that need. And if we agree and can find the money to fund it, then we'll fund it accordingly. But just because we say we can't do it for all, how can we do it for this? We can't use that as an excuse.
I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm asking you how to do it.
Well, and I just told you, on
Can we
a
do it
case by
that
case
way?
basis.
Can we take it out of our?
Can we do it that way?
Mr. Thompson, I really think that's our fiduciary role as a board, is to set priorities.
I'm not arguing that at all.
But I think that answers your question, because if we set spending priorities, and along the way, if we hear new spending requests, we've got the latitude and the statutory authority to make those judgment calls. It doesn't mean that if we fund one initiative for one department, that we've got to look at funding that same initiative across the board. That would be an unrealistic expectation.
And I hear what you're saying, too. Nobody in here supports the school any more than I do. But in my opinion, they do not rank at the same level as the needs of the sheriff and the needs of public safety.
I'm not arguing that with none of y'all. I don't think, my question is if we call it carryover funds, that's where, it can be a fund separately be put up. That's what we need staff to talk and not use that particular word, carryover fund. We got to be clever about this. I'm not arguing with what you're saying.
And that's why Brian makes the big bucks. He can come and tell us the right way to do it.
And Ronnie, we've got a whole list of reserves
Yeah.
that we carry. I've got them right here. And this would become another potentially reserve that would be on the list. And these reserves are not subjected to carry over anything else. it's subjected to whether there's a budgetary allocation put in it every year or not, but these are static reserves. They're gonna remain the same. Do I get that right, Mr. Whitlow?
Yeah, I can shed a little light on that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that you may have a little right on.
I'd like to do a recap of why we're even having this discussion. I'd like to talk about the standoff and why our sheriff has came to us with this request, just so we can paint a picture. Fill in the blank, Sheriff, because I listened to some of it, and I talked to some of your deputies, and talked to Major Sigmund. The call for shots fired, we are actually having a phone conference, me and Supervisor Smith, with a subdivision that we're talking about with Parks and Rec, and Major Sigmund says, we gotta go, we got a shots fired call, all right? So it started there, so naturally I turned on, listen to what's going on. Barricaded subject. You guys didn't have what you needed to protect your employees, our deputies. Keep this in mind, these are our deputies that we need to give them the equipment to protect them. We had to rely on the state police. How many hours was the standoff, Sheriff?
We were looking at about 10 hours.
Okay.
State police got involved initially, other than a couple of troopers that showed up. They came on scene about roughly 9 o'clock that night.
Okay, so 10 hours. How many of our deputies were there? How many deputies did we have to pull away from the other citizens in the county for this call? And they didn't even have the equipment to handle the call accordingly. We had to rely on the state police. Now, if the state police would have been busy on another standoff, we wouldn't have got anything. We'd have been there for 20 hours. Who knows how long we would have been there?
Could have easily.
I think what the sheriff's asking for $2,000 a person, take it out of our $100,000 supervisor discretionary fund. I mean,
I was there, 38 years I've done this.
I know, but
And I'm saying that we can't use the word, can we, carry over funds. We gotta cleverly come up with some kind of a way so that it doesn't automatically say everybody, well, I got carryover money. And then how do we know that they're not gonna hold back money just to say I got carryover money? It's got to come back to being independently. I got no problem with buying helmets. He knows that. Buy the helmets. If we need to take it out of the discretionary fund that the county board of supervisors got, buy it. We gotta buy more bullets. I don't do it because we gotta carry out the mission. But it's our job to do it cleverly. And you can't use generic words, take it out of your carryover fund, because then they're gonna start saying this, this, and this. That's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing with you.
I'm not, and I don't think you're arguing me. My point is, we have a standoff tomorrow. He still doesn't have the equipment he needs. Let's give him the money today. Don't we have the power to do that?
What were you short?
He's not short. There's nothing there to buy anything.
No, I thought, we're saying he needed some specific equipment.
What do you need?
Well, the gas was the big thing, and a camera to do some things we needed, but when I did the action review, because we band-aided for years, I'm getting pushback from our people that they've got equipment that's expired, because we haven't had line items to keep this up where it needs to be. That's the problem. We have band-aided and band-aided and band-aided on a budget that is never budgeted for it, and then I've got personnel who know more about this topic than I do, coming to me as their sheriff saying, you're putting your men at risk. Go to the board and do your job and get the funding that we need to do our job.
What do you need?
And that, I just said it, if I wanted to give you a list, it could be an enormous amount of money. But I'm trying to work with you all in to phase this in to get it where it needs to be without understanding what we're dealing with, what Mr. Whitlow just said.
Well, Sheriff, I think it's gonna be very helpful and instructive to the board if you could provide us with a list, and maybe some narrative information, and prioritize what these things are, what the cost is, and if we could do it on a prorated basis, what the priority would be. We need something to work with. I mean, I think we all acknowledge the need, but we don't know what it is, and we don't know how much
Well, let
it's
me
gonna
back up and
cost.
say this. I appreciate where Mr. Tatum made the point of moving forward to create
Yeah.
a line item for next year's budget. That's what you all do. I didn't come here asking for money. I've got money in my budget now to at least get a start. But I don't want to hit obstacles when I start spending that money that I did not bring any of this information to you all, and then something come back on me saying, well, we're in the middle of this pandemic, we're trying to cut, and all the sheriff is spending money. I'm just spending money that is in my budget to get us some of the items that we do not have. That would be the gas, a camera, to be able to get into a position where we can see what the barricaded person or the person we're trying to apprehend, what are they doing? What is their mindset of the actions that we can't see because they're in a closed building or room?
I think what you're saying is you're forewarning us. You don't typically need money right now, but you're forewarning in the future budgets that we're gonna probably have to have some more. That's what you're saying right now. So right now, it's not a desperate need of what you actually need. You're just forewarning us of what we're gonna cost to cover. Because no action should be taken on what you gotta have today. All we gotta do is just be mindful of when you come forward the board again, what you remind us of what you are talking about in the future. You don't typically need anything today, right?
Correct.
It's in the future we're talking about.
We need to be prepared and take small bites now, start now, taking little bites, no purpose of that. You don't come in with $100,000 wish list when we can start now with 10 or 15,000, that'll help. Get started.
Well, see, right now, I'm not real sure, although we haven't had the breakdown conversation from Mr. Whitlow to Mr. Carter as to each budget proposal each department made. And when I made mine on the 2.5, the 5, and the 7.5, it included law enforcement, it included the courts, it included corrections, it included 911 center. Law enforcement is certainly big in the bigger picture item, but all of them had significant thousands of dollars in them. So moving forward with that, even if I move on the fact what I deem is very necessary of shoring up that 911 concern problem that Ms. Foley's come to me with, being the director, if we were to expend that's a substantial amount of money coming out of a budget that I'm not sure where Mr. Whitlow was planning to use that elsewhere. I don't know, but that's kind of what I'm saying as far as the existing budget is concerned too, with those in dealing with that particular item.
Well, with your discussion, you just forewarned us, and we need to some way to cover the future expenses. So it's nothing desperate got to be done today. It's just he's forewarning us.
We need to get ready.
What's coming. Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Does your men and women have helmets and gas masks right now?
They do. The helmets, many of them have expired. The radio system that they've used for years are inadequate. Technology, as fast as it's moving, we certainly can look at the military and getting some of the surplus items at a much reduced rate, which we're looking to do now. They had a blanket that is a bulletproof blanket that they were using to shield themselves. It's expired 10 years ago. And that's what they were going to utilize, that and shields that expired both, as they were approaching this door to get, even just to get communication, to try to figure out what this person is, what's going on with their mindset, mentally, where they're at. And again, what do you do when you have a meeting? You do an after-action review. Then you look at what your people are saying, whether it's public safety or anyone, and then you look back at what we can do to fix those things, and that's what I'm just bringing to you today. In the area, I think they brought some very legitimate concerns that they have, and again, a lot of it's because that we just piecemeal as we go along.
And I think you're on the record today, Sheriff. You'll be part of the formal record with your request. And I think, and I encourage you, as I would any other department head or constitutional officer, make sure your budget requests articulate these needs. And I'm a big believer in talking about consequence of not funding. So I think we've really crossed some good territory here. And gentlemen, you guys know this, we gotta roll our sleeves up. We're hearing from the sheriff with these needs, and we've got a shoestring budget. I've got an IT department over here that is going to be compromised at some point in the near future. I mean, there are so many things that we just, you're laughing at me, John?
No, I'm knocking on the wood. I'm praying to God that doesn't happen.
Well, but I'm saying, we've got relative needs across this entire organization. We gotta roll our sleeves up, and we've got to make some very tough decisions.
I still say something that's gonna be good.
You're right.
And I do thank you all for the conversations that we have and the openness to discuss these things. It does mean a lot. Thank you.
I want to go on record and tell you that if you guys need something, make sure our men and women are safe, I want you to get it. I don't care how much it costs.
Well, he said he could get it out of his budget
Yeah.
at this time.
I'll support him in anything we need to do to get
take his word for saying he's got sufficient funds.
Well, I've been knowing long enough, you take his word.
And, so, Mr. Whitlow, I believe you said he was through.
like 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
I want to make sure we help our school system too, man. I want to make sure that our seniors, when it's safe, get the proper graduation and whatever we need to do as a board to help our school board. I want to make sure our seniors get the proper graduation that they deserve, because their senior year has been absolutely destroyed over this virus. And I want to make sure that we have one spectacular graduation.
It's a good point, but, okay, I'm on recess. We've, I think, covered pretty much what we needed to cover. Our regular scheduled meeting, May the 19th, and we are recessed.
You mean it's that simple? I didn't know that I was.